Next, we're going to be looking at foundation number 5, which is counting the joy. 11 potential advantages and opportunities in church revitalization. Last time, in foundation number 4, we looked at considering the cost. And of course, we always want to count the cost. And there are potential disadvantages, real challenges in revitalization and replanting. But what I want to do now for the next few minutes is focus on the potential advantages and the opportunities in church revitalization. There is a great joy in revitalization. Of course, this is the passion of my life, so I get excited just talking about this. But I would argue, boy, there is not much more exciting in this life as a Christian than being part of a church that was dying and seeing the Holy Spirit bring that church back to life for the sake of the gospel and God's glory. So what I want to do is I want to look at 11 potential advantages and opportunities in church revitalization. Here's number 1. Revitalization exchanges a negative church witness with a positive one in a community. You see, healthy biblical revitalization, it establishes a new and fresh gospel presence in a community while at the same time removing a bad witness. So this church that has maybe been an eyesore, been a non-factor, has potentially been a bad witness, is now a new fresh witness for the gospel. If healthy churches, listen, make a positive statement about the gospel to the surrounding community, and they do, dying churches send out a negative message. It sends out a message that Jesus and his people and his gospel are irrelevant. What does it say to a community when a church dies? It says that this Jesus stuff, take it or leave it. Clearly there's not a lot of power in this Jesus thing, in this gospel that they proclaim. Listen, when a community sees a dying church come back to life, back to vibrancy, back to health, the watching world, that watching community sees a vibrant and dynamic witness for Jesus where formerly there was an anti-witness. This is a huge advantage. This is a huge plus about giving your life to revitalization. It exchanges a negative church witness with a positive one in a community. And the fame of Jesus spreads. Here's number 2. You have a building. You have a building. This is a huge plus in most cases for revitalizers and replanters. Listen, when you have your own building, you can do all kinds of stuff, right? Many church planters that I know and am friends with, they can explain to you the challenges of having to set up and take down every week in an auditorium or in a gymnasium or at a school or some other spot. To not have a location where they can do events midweek or whatever. In a revitalization, typically you've got a building. You've got a building, you can use that building for all kinds of purposes beyond just Sunday morning. That building can be a tool for outreach of various kinds to kids, to youth. There can be Bible studies, community groups of various kinds, after school clubs. You have a building, and that's huge. That's a huge statement to the community because you're there. You are embedded in that community, and that way you can serve that community in unique ways. Number 3, there are older Christians. There are older Christians. In a revitalization context, this church is declining and dying and most likely have had a very difficult time reaching younger people. And so what you usually find are older saints, older folks who are there. And they've been faithful and they've been holding on for a long time. And I would say this is a huge plus. This is a plus. The church is at its healthiest when it is intergenerational. I believe that's so true. I think it's just biblical. And older Christians are a huge piece of this. Let me just tell you 3 things that older Christians bring to the table that they have. 1, they have maturity and experience. They have maturity and experience in life and in following Jesus that younger believers, the younger people don't have. That's just the truth. And with that maturity and that experience is wisdom the younger folks desperately need. And so I get so excited when I see churches that have a vision for this, of combining and connecting older folks with younger folks for the sake of mutual edification, encouragement. Here's a second thing that older folks bring. They have time. They have time. Listen, Younger folks, younger couples, young families are busy as can be. They're going a million miles an hour with school and sports and all these things. A lot of our older folks, they have time. They're either at retirement age, but their schedules, their kids are out of the house, and they can give to that time. And that's the third thing that many times older folks bring, is a desire to serve. They have gifts, just like God has gifted all people, and yet so many times older folks are underutilized in the church. And so this is a beautiful thing. It's a glorious thing that we have a chance in revitalizing churches to engage older generations and unleash them for the last part of their life to serve the Lord faithfully and to reach others with the gospel. Here's number 4, is resources. Resources. Justin Dieter, he writes this, and when we think about resources, I think he gets to the heart of the advantage of having resources. He says the amount of resources in established churches are astounding. The amount of financial assets, facilities, and people are overwhelming. The reason most of these churches have started declining is not because they lack resources, but because they lack vision. These established churches have the resources to do incredible things for God and His mission. The problem is they may need to be reprioritized. So churches that are declining typically have resources, some resources. Even if a church only has a building and doesn't have much money in the bank, that's a building. That's a major resource. And so again, as you think about the advantages, the pluses of revitalization and replanting, there are resources available in that for the sake of ministry that would not be present in other ministry opportunities. Here's number 5. Revitalization encourages the saints in the dying congregation. And this is the heart of pastoral ministry, isn't it? It's to care for the sheep, the flock of God that is under our care, as Peter writes in 1 Peter. Many of the members of a struggling church, of a dying congregation, are faithful believers. They love Jesus, they're tired, they're worn down, but they are deeply committed to the congregation. And the reality is this: these are the folks who have hung in there. The very reason that we even have the opportunity, perhaps, to revitalize this church is because of the faithful folks who didn't jump ship when probably many others did. They've been faithful to hold this church together in really hard times. And there they are. And what they need is they need to be refreshed in the gospel. And as a replanter, as a revitalizer, you get to do this. You get to come alongside and love these saints, encourage them in the Lord, point them to Jesus, encourage them and thank them and care for their souls. This is what they need. What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful opportunity that a pastor has in revitalization in this way. Here's number 6. A surrounding community in need of the gospel. Here's what we know. Wherever that declining church is located, whatever it is, whatever church this is that we're talking about, perhaps, wherever that declining church is, that dying church is, it is surrounded by a community filled with people who don't know Jesus. Wherever it is. I don't care if you're talking California, you're talking Texas, Alabama, New York, another part of the world. Wherever that church is, I promise you, it is surrounded by people in that community that don't know Jesus and are in desperate need of the gospel. And that is a huge advantage. You're going to a mission field that needs to be reached. Number 7, allows the leadership to do ministry on the cheap. You have a building, the basics are already in place. Here's what I want to emphasize here. In a revitalization context, there's really not a need to be spending a ton of money on a lot of other things. In fact, what I would say is this. One of the, I think, wrong understandings of revitalization replanting is that you need a ton of resources to get things back looking good and new signage and all this. That's all fine and good. And if you can do that, great. But the reality is if you have a building and you've got the Bible and you've got a love for people, you're good to go. And we need to remember that. You have the basics. You have the basics to get in the game right now. There aren't startup costs that a church plant, for instance, would have. And as we seek to make changes in this church, the beautiful thing is that changes can be made many times by using the resources that are already there and using the building that's already present. And this is the kind of thing that I think we have a wrong understanding many times, that in revitalization you have to have all the smoke and whistles and lights and all this stuff, when you really don't. What we really need is the Bible, we have a building, and we've got a love for people. And that's what we need to lean into. We can do ministry on the cheap. Here's number 8. More likely has a multi-generational congregational value. This is a huge advantage. This is a huge advantage. Sometimes in younger churches, or oftentimes in church plants, one of the big challenges is how to reach older folks or to reach multi-generations. Because typically you might be reaching young people, which is great. But again, the church is at its best and most potent, most powerful, most God-glorifying, I believe, and I think the scriptures teach this clearly, when we're multi-generational, young and old together. And so in a revitalization, the beautiful thing is this value is already embedded into the church culture. That's what it is. The folks who are there, it's already a multi-generational community, most likely. If it's just older folks, well then praise God. You can come in, begin reaching younger folks. Wherever you go, for the most part, what I can tell you is it's much easier to lean into a multi-generational philosophy of ministry in a revitalized context than it is many times in a church planting context, because it's already embedded. It's already there. There's already a history. There are already multi-generations represented in that church. Here's number 9. Most established churches have a system in place for their finances and legal issues. In other words, churches that have been around a long time, while some of their systems are probably not working great, they at least have systems in place. So there's probably folks already there who are taking care of money, the finances, taking care of all kinds of nuts and bolts, logistical, administrative things that are needed to keep a church going. Legal contracts of various kinds, whatever. This is huge. This saves you as a replanter or revitalizer from a ton of headache, because there's folks already in place doing these things. Many times they're doing them pretty well. And so that's a plus. Most churches have a system in place for their finances and their legal issues. Here's number 10. History and tradition of the church. You know, while this can be a negative, I would like to put forth that it's more of a positive than a negative. In fact, I was with some folks not long ago, and one man in particular, we were talking about revitalization and replanting, and he said, man, that's just crazy. I don't know how anybody could do that. He's like, replanting to me, it just sounds like trying to plant a church, but with a whole bunch of baggage that you got to deal with. And I heard him say this, and the reality is this: there's not baggage, there's history. And when you have a pastor's heart, and you love people well, and you understand that God has been at work in this church from way before I was even alive, you begin to lean in and see the beauty of the history and the tradition of this church, that by God's grace we have been invited into part of this story that God has been writing in this congregation. I would like to tell you that history and tradition can be a huge positive. One of the positive things about the history and tradition of a church is most likely this is a church that's rooted in a tradition, in a denomination. And so it's part of something much bigger than just itself. One of my great concerns is for many church plants and even the non-denominational movement is we've created churches and pastors who are completely isolated from other believers and other leaders and other churches. And whether that's a lack of accountability, it's a lack of encouragement, it's not a real healthy thing. In revitalization, typically what you find is a church that has been part of a tradition. And so there's a strength to that. There's a safety in that. And there's wisdom in that. Here's number 11. Number 11. The last potential advantage that I want to throw out there is this: redemption of a church for God's glory. Again, all 10 of these things I've mentioned before, I believe, are advantages, are actually exciting things of why you would want to pursue revitalization and replanting. But it all leads to this number 11, which is this: ultimately, The great joy of revitalization and replanting is that we get to see God glorified. We get to see God glorified as He redeems a church, as He brings a dying church back to life, a church that many people have given up on, a church that is not beautiful or powerful or influential in the eyes of the world. The Lord, by His grace, loves to take weakness and show off His glory through His strength in bringing dead things or dying things back to life. That's the story of the gospel. The story of the gospel is we were dead and Christ came and made us alive. We are new creations. And this gospel story is so beautifully seen and told in the revitalization and the replanting of churches. And so my prayer is that above all, we would be most excited about the revitalization and replanting of churches because God is glorified in it.